But your right hand, the thing that I wanted to ask you about is like the thing I never could do is, I mean, I can do it.
Well,
I get lucky sometimes.
Paul, I can't do it anymore.
Well, I know
like I used to, but it was.
Is that still palm blocking when you do it? That's my question.
Well, it's part. I think it's part pick blocking and palm blocking. Because I'm muting with the picks also.
Yeah, see that?
And the palm.
Yeah. So there, yeah.
Or if you're doing that little silly thing at the end of that instrumental we were doing before the camera was starting.
Yep. Yeah, well, that was on one of your instrumentals. Was that pedal pushing?
Pushing or pedal or something.
Yeah.
I think Tom Bromley and I both had an instrumental with the same title, but a different melody.
Well, and I love Tom, but I loved yours better because it was.
That one was the trick was the syncopation and the timing, you know.
Yeah.
Because I can't think of it.
Yeah.
Just.
Yeah, that's hard.
I do it with
That's chromatic. That's.
Then I can do it in sync and make it sync, but I can't do it separated because I don't have anything to latch on to.
Oh yeah, you don't have you need a groove too. That would help. Yeah, that would help a lot. And because I've seen Lloyd always steps up to the plate and then hits his grand slam. But this leads me into this whole thing about Little Darlin records, because there's an interesting, historians are looking back at music now, and there's three key periods I think that they look back because something was more. I view it as raw. Some of it more raw than others, but that period when George Jones and Gene Shepard and all them, Nashville went countrypolitan, or whatever they called it.
Countrypolitan, indeed, about 1974 or 5.
Yeah.
Really big time.
Really big time, and it was kind of headed there before that. Yeah. But Little Darlin, now when people want to know about country music and you meet people, they want to know about specific periods. They want to know Little Darlin, Bakersfield, and Star Day, what went on there, because those were all
they were
independent.
Different. They were independent. And
independent labels and independent of
the profile, the mold.
Yeah. The Nashville was like about being slick, the Everly Brothers, and that was Chet. And Chet talked about this at a clinic with Mark Knopfler. They envisioned Nashville becoming like what New York and different places. They wanted to be like we cut everything here, which oddly enough we do, and we did, like you said, your bulk of with the Sweethearts display, all these rock and pop records you did, but you were playing on one of the greatest independent labels, with all the Johnny Paycheck stuff, and there were a lot of guys. I worked for this guy named Joe Payne. Ernie Trent was his real name, but he was signed.
Joe Payne, I remember Joe Payne.
You played. Let me see if I can remember it. I remember I had never heard that sound. I thought, what in the world is that? But you were given this free reign, and so. Was that accepted in town, or were there people that kind of resisted that? Because that music's revolutionary.
That is the best question I've been asked in a long time. The answer is no. It wasn't.
Oh, really?
Accepted. It was vehemently anti-Nashville. Owen Bradley did not like it specifically.
Oh, really?
I was recording for Owen one day at Bradley's barn, and I was doing a session for Jack Green, I believe, and he evidently had heard a Little Darlin record on the way to the studio, and it offended him equally, obviously. And he came up to me and he said, I want to ask you a question, Lloyd. Are you guys, when you go in the studio and cut those Little Darlin records, are you serious, or are you just wasting studio time? And
oh my God!
Now
that's Owen Bradley saying that.
Here's one of the gods, the trifecta of Nashville. You got Owen Bradley, Chet Atkins, and Paul Cohen.
Yeah.
And then if you want to broaden it into a rectangle, you can add Fred Foster at Monument Studio,
Yeah.
Monument Records, because he was so instrumental in some of the biggest names in history.
Oh, yeah.
But and, you know, my instinct was to be defensive, but I couldn't. You can't do that with a person like Owen, because I was dependent on them calling me for sessions for Decca Records and
Yeah.
MCA. I wasn't going to say anything to offend him. So,
Yeah.
so I had to think about what I was going to say, and I waited a few seconds. He's standing there waiting for. He didn't smile, and finally I looked up at him. I said, "Owen," I said, "No, we're serious when we cut those records. We're dead serious." And I didn't smile. And I didn't know what he was going to say, and he looked at me for a few seconds. And he said, "Okay," and kind of chuckled and walked away. But I could tell he was offended because, you know, his records were so well put together. They were just always beautiful, just like Billy Sherrill's later were, and,
Yeah.
or even during that period. There was a special quality. Everybody's in tune. Everybody's got good tone.
They were orchestrated records.
And
more
they
than,
were orchestrated
yeah.
because Owen was an orchestra leader in his other incarnation before he was the producer. And one time, Aubrey Mayhew, who was the owner of Little Darlin Records, told me, he said, and it was one of the few times I saw him kind of sad because he didn't show much emotion. He was a kind of a quiet, very, very bright man, and I think a book could be well in order to be written about Aubrey Mayhew. But he told me one day, and I was leader on all the sessions, he said, "You know, Lloyd," he said, "all these years I've been cutting these records now here in Nashville, not a single producer's ever invited me to lunch." And I thought, well, that was instructive, and that was really revealing too, because they didn't like him, because they thought he was cutting stuff that had too edgy a sound. It was it had too many highs. It didn't have bottom end. But
And twang.
I can tell you, and here was Aubrey Mayhew's theory.
Yeah.
When we cut the records, we cut most of them in RCA Studio B with Al Pachuki, my favorite engineer of
Yeah, I
all
loved
time.
Al.
Mixing the records. He's the one who mixed all the Charlie Pride records. He mixed Dolly. Bill Vandervoort too.
Yeah.
But he was Elvis Presley's engineer too. So this guy knew his stuff, and he loved my steel. He always had me mixed up, you know, and so those records had plenty of bottom end, bass, and everything.
Yeah.
When we cut the records, but when they came out, they didn't sound this way. Aubrey Mayhew, what he did was take those 3 and 4 track tapes to New York, the mixed version, the mixed down to a stereo two track mix, and he had an engineer in a studio up there take them and put them through this compression machine and cut all the bottom end off. Now, he always had the steel turned up loud anyway. If you hear a Little Darlin record, you're going to hear a lot of steel normally. And so all he did was cut the bottom end off and made it more compressed and added a lot of highs to what was left and more reverb. And that was Little Darlin sound. What he told me, he said, these things aren't mixed for turntables. He said, these are mixed so when you're driving along on the radio listening, and suddenly a Little Darlin record comes out, it'll grab you right by the throat.
It did too.
And you'll know it's a Little Darlin. And that was his theory.
And
those kind of things were not what Owen Bradley and Chet Atkins and the other producers were about. They were trying to get away from that primitive kind of element. But there was also a magical quality about what we were doing on the Little Darlin because they were experimental and we were adventurous and anything went. I could play anything without question. And some of those paycheck things, man, I had to put a piece of tape on my guitar when I did the intro to Jukebox Charlie because it gets out of the fret range, and I couldn't see the landing points. So we got little pieces of white tape to put on the landing spots so I could get through the intro.
Yeah, that's a lot of very narrow space up there to do something like that.
It's all on the first and third string, I think.
Yeah.
Let's see. We did it in B flat. It was like... It's on the first and second string, really. And I can sort of get through it now, but but we were in the studio and I had time was premium. But
I was going to say the pressure of that's another thing that I want to talk to you about, because we can sit in this room and I can stumble, and I do every time I play, but there's not the pressure of when that light goes on, and that's really what it separates the musicians that survive in that world, is the guy that can try to transition when that pressure goes on, but you got to sound like you're as relaxed as you're sitting here in the room and playing.
Isn't it a difficult thing to make that evolutional jump? And it's really hard for any musician to tune that light out and think, I'm just playing. This is not the record. You don't think of all those things, because if you do, you'll get intimidated or just freeze up. And I've seen musicians do this.
Oh yeah, they do. But that's the thing that to succeed, like for anybody out there that would want to pursue this. And I know as a kid, I dreamed of playing on records. That's how I learned. I was playing along with the radio, and that's how I learned. And I know Lloyd, same way. We had a vision, of a dream, and but I thought that was something worth saying.
It is, and there's so many elements that go into the studio recording it, and that becomes. I mean, if you take all the other elements and you got everything else put together, if that red light intimidates you, then all this other stuff doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah, no.
because then you're locked out, emotionally locked out. And I never had a period in my career, except one time. I will tell you, Paul, I've never told this in an interview, but all the years I spent in the studio, I never felt intimidated by the atmosphere or the environment or the and I never ran out of ideas. It was an era where they encouraged ideas, and they didn't want you to ask questions. They wanted you to play what you had, and I never ran dry, except I had a 3-month period one time. I don't remember, sometime in the early 1970s, I think, and I don't know if I started thinking about it or what, and suddenly I realized one day it's like the spigot had been turned off for the ideas, and I just couldn't think of anything new. But I wasn't really locked out, because nobody knew except me, but I was just relying on stuff I had played. I mean, I knew the instruments, so I wasn't going to be, but I didn't feel like I had any really new contributions during that 3-month period. And by the end of that 3 months, I was really, really getting concerned, because I thought, if I can't do what I've always done, then I don't belong in the studio. I think I should be. And I don't know, one morning I woke up and went back to the studio, and the shield had been lifted again. But that was the only time, and so I could empathize with players who got intimidated by it. And I must have got to thinking about it. Boy, this is a lot of expectation, for a guy to go in every day with 3 or 4 times a day, most often, and 3 or 4 songs a session, and you expected to produce every time.
Yeah.
And I never. You talked about earlier about I'll play it or we'll play it, but I remember when Charlie McCoy, when Charlie and I were together on a session, he always, it was, if they say, who wants this intro? Well, we never, it would always be a contest. I'll do it. And we'd both probably say it in unison. We never hesitated.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be at the front of the class.
Yeah.
And Charlie did too. Now, I had more ammunition with the steel than he had the harp. But still, I mean, we would vie for whoever was going to play. And a lot of times we'd play them together. Like, we probably said that on the Jerry Lee Lewis record, which was What Made Milwaukee Famous Made a Fool Out of Me. It's the harp and the steel. So we probably compromised. So let's just both play it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. But that's friendship. It's like that. It's like to me a baseball team. It's like, okay, you're batting the first, second, and third, and then I'm going to clean this. It's like you all want the home run. And that's what, to me, that's what it takes, in my experience, that's what it takes is a room full of people like that, but with the willingness to immediately back off and not be offended. And that's the hard thing pull back if you believe in your idea so much, but sometimes
that really didn't.
Yeah.
That wasn't part of my thinking process normally. Now, I'm sure that, like I said earlier, that there were times where I believed in an idea so strongly that I would push a little further.
Yeah.
But if there was still resistance, I would back off.
Oh, yeah.
Because what I never forgot, and what you never forgot, is that we were the hired people.
Yeah.
And we were not the artist.
Yeah.
And they were hiring us for a function and a job, and because we could do that job, not to have egos and try to dominate the session. And if it required that, and that's what they wanted, then we could do it. But our job was to integrate into the session and be part of it, and not try to dominate anything. Because ultimately we were, I looked at it, I think we were mercenaries. We were called, and we worked when the calls come in, and you still do, and occasionally I do, not very often, but you're I mean.
He says not often. I got to tell you a story. We were trying to hook up over the phone, and I tried to get him for 2 days, and I get these messages. Sorry, Paul, man, I've been in the studio all day, and it's like, he said it feels like the 60s again, and it was great. But I mean, yeah, it's, what's great is that, and I'm envious, nobody knows what the luck of the draw is, and I've told you this, it's, I hated that Buddy got arthritis, and, we don't know.
And Buddy Emmons.
Yeah, Buddy Emmons, yes. But you don't know as you age and it can happen as a young man. So my theory is to stress, really enjoy what you're doing while you do it. And I hope
absolutely.
that when I get, if I live as long as you've lived already, but if I do, to play like Lloyd didn't lose a thing. And John Huey, up until he passed away, same way.
He was better, if anything.
Yeah, and that's the way I feel. Like I think you're better than you've ever played, and I think that.
Well, I have more knowledge and information. I don't have probably the fire in my belly that I had when I was younger, but I have the
until you
maturity.
Put this in your hand.
The fire is, yeah. But everything comes from up here anyway,
Yeah.
and it's all translated into this and this, and
yeah,
and all these pedals and things. But
yeah.
That's what players ought to realize, that don't get too caught up in your equipment. I mean, you got to have good equipment, functional equipment, but ultimately the music's coming from this little 3.5 pound piece of gray matter we got up here, and it's being disseminated through all these other elements of our body, our knees and our feet and our hands.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately the reality of it. And all the pedals in the world aren't going to save you from, if you got to have you got to learn this thing to play it well, and you can't just expect it to be thrown in your lap. Hey, I'm going to play a steel guitar, and 6 months later be a great steel player. It doesn't work, and even 6 years later it doesn't work. And it took you and I grew up with the instrument and evolved with the instrument, and you had a better foundation to work from than I did, because it was more primitive.
Well, I had you and Buddy and Hal
and Myrick, and Tom Brumley, and you had and Ralph Mooney he was a big deal.
Yeah.
With his style from the West Coast. But when I grew up, I mean, and it's no disparagement or disrespect to those guys, but who I was listening to, it was easy for me to play like them, because it was much more primitive. There was Don Helms, who had wonderful sound with Hank Williams.
Oh, yeah.
And he cut with Patsy Cline, too, and I mean, it's beautiful stuff. But he was easy to imitate or emulate, and then there was Bob Foster, who was the major. Nobody talks about Bob Foster.
Yeah, no, he doesn't get talked about a lot.
He was the non-pedal player that did so many sessions, and Johnny Seibert, who played with Carl Smith, had developed his style around what Bob Foster was doing. And Bob Foster was like Jerry Bird. He didn't gravitate to pedals when he didn't. Probably like Jerry didn't think pedals were here to stay, and when he looked around, they were entrenched, and the non-pedals were out for recordings, and he was a forgotten creature. But I was listening to all these guys learning the records, how they played on Fair and Young records before pedals, and Carl Smith records that Johnny Seibert was playing on, and what. Curly Chalker, that intro, which was so magical on Always Late with
Lefty.
and I didn't know who was playing that, but it was certainly different.
I didn't know that was Chalker till I moved to Nashville, because nobody up in Detroit knew who that was, but I always thought, man, that's unusual. It was just a weird riff that he played, but
Well, it was, and he did it with the
C6, and I always thought it was on because everything commercial was on E9,
and that was commercial though.
Yeah,
wasn't
but it's very commercial. But it was a C6, and I didn't know Curly
Lefty
did.
Frizzell, yeah, it was a.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
It's all with the C6 stuff.
yeah.
And it was just
Yeah.
simple but magical.
It was at the beginning of and then when Lefty's voice, Lefty Frizzell, we're talking about,
Yes.
when his voice came on, it was it's like hearing.
You knew who was going to sing it because
Yeah.
that was the introduction, really.
Yeah.
This is Lefty Frizzell. I mean,
Yeah.
he was saying that with his intro.
Yeah, it was like the same thing as Luther Perkins did with Johnny
With Johnny
Cash,
Cash,
and
indeed.
Ernest Tubb with Billy Bird,
Bird.
and there's certain people, and you've had those moments. I always thought that when I heard your steel kick off, it didn't matter what it was. I knew it was going to be a Charlie Pride record because there was just a unique thing,
Well,